matter experts today will really go into a lot more detail, is an ecosystem where accurate, reliable, trustworthy information is accessible to all sectors of society. And the UN has these 5 global principles for information integrity, and I provided the link below the figure here, and it leads to a number of documents that they've provided that look at these 5 principles, right? So societal trust and resilience, health incentives, public empowerment, independent, free, and pluralistic media, and transparency in research. And so the idea here, right, is protecting this ecosystem requires supporting societal trust, public empowerment, and independent media while fighting against online falsehoods. So some of the key dimensions, and these can come in different forms, but just wanted to try to capture them in 3 kind of concise bullets, is thinking about information integrity as accuracy and reliability, ensuring data and content are correct, they're consistent and free from malicious alteration or error, that they're safe and they're inclusive. So they protect users or consumers from hate speech, discrimination, and targeted abuse, either in person or online. And then there's this ecosystem health, right? It's reducing the spread of deliberate disinformation and accidental misinformation, especially from digital platforms and artificial intelligence. So as we continue to consider information integrity, and as I continue to have a few more slides, what I'd love for you all to do, and we have some individuals monitoring the chat today, is think about, what does information integrity mean to you? So if you could consider that and post maybe 1 or 2 words in the chat describing what information integrity means to you. And then, in your opinion, what is one sector where, from your experience, trust is most at risk? We'd be thrilled to hear from you, and we'll incorporate that into the discussion at the end of the session. So why does information integrity matter? And this is, I think, just a general concept, but it very much applies to us all as we come as science communicators, as journalists, as scientists, and researchers, and biosafety professionals. It matters because strengthening information integrity provides freedom of expression and access to a range of data sources, and that allows people to navigate information spaces freely and safely, so they can consider different sources of information and really make their own decisions instead of only being able to trust one media outlet or one source of information. It involves building resilient societies that support trust, knowledge, and public empowerment, and so really building that strong community. And when we consider challenges for implementation of information integrity, it's a variety of risks, right? So disinformation, hate speech, restrictions on press, freedom of press, and of course the malicious use of technologies, as I've talked about before. So coming into today's discussion, and we thinking about information's integrity, the role for it in life sciences, emerging technology, public trust, and policy, it supports really the same topics if we think of it from a big scale or big picture perspective, and then coming into these more targeted topics. It supports accuracy, safety, fairness, accountability, public confidence, and effective policy across emerging technology and the life sciences. And without this, innovation becomes harder to trust, it becomes harder to regulate, and it becomes harder to use responsibly. So what I've just done very briefly, because I know our speakers are really going to cover this in much more detail, is try to take each one of these topics and think about information integrity's role for emerging tech, life sciences, public trust, and policy. So if we think about emerging technology, information integrity relies on accurate, complete, and secure data, right? So if the data is wrong, if it's been tampered with, the technology can be, it can produce flawed, unsafe, or biased outcomes, right? So that can be quite challenging. From a life science perspective, it depends on trustworthy data, right? So inaccurate information integrity can lead to invalid results, missed safety issues, and delays on treatments or approvals. And that can be anywhere from medical countermeasure to some more proactive health approaches. Public trust, right? So thinking about requires confidence that the technologies and scientific systems that are reliable and are being used responsibly. So if information is misleading, if it's manipulated or inconsistent, then trust is going to decline and adoption is going to slow. And that could be in small communities, it could be much larger communities, it could be regional or global communities. And then from a policy perspective, it relies on accurate information to create laws, regulations, and oversight. So if the underlying data is inaccurate, policies could be ineffective, they could be outdated, and potentially even more importantly, they could be harmful to the communities that need it the most. So I will stop here to leave the most time possible for our subject matter experts and just say thank you all so much for being here, for your time, for your attention, and for your participation. And Rosetta, I hand it back over to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Erin, for those sentiments. And now I'd like to invite the co-moderator on board, Dr. Gloria Obake. She is science communication strategist and with a PhD in science communication. Welcome on board, Dr. Gloria, and Dr. Erin set the stage by asking questions, and I think Gloria will have a chance to look at the answers that the participants gave. Welcome on board, Gloria.
Thank you so much, Rosalia. Thank you so much. Thank you, Dr. Erin, for setting the stage for your keynote presentation, and which is actually very apt because public trust indeed requires confidence. It's very essential. It's an integral part of biotechnology, life science as a whole. It's important. So we will be kickstarting now. I would like to, first of all, launch a poll. I would like participants to, type on the charts section, what misinformation challenge do you encounter most often? In the course of your work, in the course of your daily activity, what misinformation challenge do you feel that you encounter most often? So while that is going on, I would just like to, I know Dr. Erin had sent a poster question, and we have some responses here. So I'll just quickly look at that response. So I'm seeing some responses here: trustworthy, gene editing and synthetic biology, genetic modified organism. Okay, so I have some here: truthfulness, credibility, accuracy. Yeah, so keep your comments coming. Please, it's very important to gauge your opinion, to gauge your expectation. What do you expect? What do you hope? I know we have filled a pre-survey assessment form, but we also like to hear from you here. What misinformation? What do you consider as misinformation? How? What challenges do you have when it comes to misinformation? how do you encounter it? What do you encounter? So would like to hear from you. Yes, reliability, public health, truthfulness, those are very critical responses to the question that was posed during the keynote presentation. So please, it's very important that we'll have your opinion concerning that. Yes, so okay. Okay. Disinformation about the risk of genetic modification. Disinformation about the risk. That's intentionally misinforming the public. Fake accounts, impersonalizations. Yes, so these are what our speakers, our panelists will look at to ensure they see how they tackle. Okay. Okay. How can scientists, policymakers, and communicators work together to ensure that accurate scientific information reaches the public and builds trust in emerging technology? All right, so let's keep our comments coming. Yeah, fake accounts, impersonalization. There is widespread little understanding of GMOs. Yes, people can differentiate between hybrids and GMOs. Hybrids differentiate hybrids from GMOs. Mistrust from the public about the intentions of government entities and large organizations working in public health. Then we also have gene drive myth, complex biotechnology terms. Okay, AI generated contents are becoming more difficult to detect. Yes, we also have a panelist who will be delving into this particular area. So while we are doing that, I would just like to quickly give, I would like to introduce our first panelist, our first presentation. And that will be understanding the information threat landscape. And that our speaker is for this segment is our speaker for this segment is Tara Crickshell. I hope I got that correctly. So I would just like to quickly introduce her. Dr. Tara is a senior scholar at the Johns Hopkins Center for Health Security and an associate professor in the Department of Environmental Health and Engineering at the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health. Dr. Sell's work focuses on public health preparedness and response, combating disinformation, risk communication, and addressing misleading health rumors. She leads the Johns Hopkins implementation team as part of the G7 Global Partnership Against the Spread of Weapons and Materials of Mass Destructions, Countering WMD, Disinformation Initiative. She also leads the US CDC-funded Region 3 Center for Public Health Preparedness and Response. She led work on the Trust in Public Health project and the practical playbook to address health rumors. Prior to her work in academia, she was a professional athlete and won a silver medal in the 2024 Olympics. Yes. Dr. Tara?
Oh, thank you.
Yes.
Yeah, the Olympics were in 2004. It wasn't 2 years ago. So it's been a
All
while
right.
since I was a professional athlete. But thank you for that wonderful introduction, Gloria. And I'm so pleased to be here to chat with you. I have a very brief slideshow for you. Let's see. Let me make sure that you can see it. Looks like everything's good. So you can see at the bottom of the screen here, the organizations that have sponsored this work. Of course, these opinions, the opinions I'm going to share with you today are my own, and they don't necessarily represent the opinions of those who funded this work. So I want to start with a few definitions for you today, and just be prepared with your responses in the chat, because there's a few activities here. But I want to start by just sort of defining misinformation, and that's really information that's false in the context of the scientific understanding of the time, but it's really not on purpose, right? It's ignorance, it's poor understanding. Someone just, believes the wrong thing and says the wrong thing. But disinformation is different, right? It's purposefully created and disseminated falsehoods. And again, still in the context of the scientific information of the time. But in this case, it's someone who's on purpose, knows they're lying, spreads the lie. And then malinformation is based on true information, but it is used to inflict harm. So I have a few examples here for you, and post in the chat which number is misinformation, disinformation, and malinformation. So we have here, a person posts online that garlic tea cures the flu. Another one here, a fake news account intentionally spreads a lie about a political candidate. And the last one is, someone leaks private emails and uses parts of them to make the person look bad. So go ahead and put in the chat while we're going through the rest of this slide, what example is what, and feel free to add your own if you've seen any like this. But I want to sort of start and say, this is not, we've heard a lot about this in the recent years, and it's a growing problem, but it's not a new problem. We've seen these issues with the information landscape for a long time. Here is an example from the American Public Health Association in 1930 from their Health in Pictures publication. And here we have, misinformation as it relates to smallpox, getting people vaccinated. There are people who are anti-vaccinated or anti-vax. Back in the 1930s, there was already anti-vaxxers, and other people who are careless or that type of thing. So we see it going on. We've had this issue for a long time, but we have a different sort of information ecosystem today that involves a lot of technology that allows these messages to move more quickly, and also for people to be in these very closed information spaces, these echo chambers, which make it unlikely that they're able to chat with others, do the social milling of different pieces of information that allow people to get information from others. It's in many ways, people have very isolated information spaces now, and this can be a real problem. So we also have an infodemic, which is a rapid, large-scale spread of health information and misinformation through a variety of different channels. And really this overabundance of information, and some of it's accurate and some of it isn't, makes it really difficult for people to differentiate between false and true information. They're being blasted with all this information. How do we choose what's right and what's not? Well, people use mental shortcuts or heuristics to sort of say, like, all right, I know this person is part of this group. I trust that group, so I'm going to choose that person's information. Or this thing aligns with my values and beliefs, so it makes sense to me. And I have an example here, sort of during the COVID-19 pandemic, there was a really strong misinformation, disinformation, whatever it was, effort, trying to sort of say that it was planned. There was even a movie, The Plandemic, and a second movie about the Plandemic too. And actually the exercise that our Center for Health Security had put on in October 2019 was featured in those rumors and disinformation campaigns, saying that we planned the whole thing. And so actually I found this in one of the Twitter data sets that I was analyzing. When you're a researcher and you find yourself in your data set, that is the moment when you feel like you've made it. But in this case, people were saying, here I was talking about, we were talking in the event about how misinformation would be a problem, and here we are, people saying that discussion was really part of a plan on how to suppress free speech. So very meta, and we have these kind of crazy things happening all the time now. But I want to pause here and talk a little bit to say, even though we think they're crazy rumors, if you look back, there are clear patterns. And, if you've done enough of this work over time, you see like, oh, that's another sort of like false cure rumor, or, that's another scapegoating of a community. You can see the patterns that happen. So a lot of times they have to do with social cultural narratives, like existing narratives. So we know there's an anti-vax narrative, right? Something will pop right into that narrative. There's also like a child endangerment narrative, right? And so some of these rumors will pop right into those narratives. So we can see sort of reoccurring different rumor types during emergencies. And so in this project, we sort of classified them. But the key here is to understand that we've seen a lot of these rumors before. A lot of times it's copy and paste. And we can, once we've seen them, we can anticipate them, and we can use sort of an existing sort of plan to counter them rather than having to reinvent the wheel every time. Another point I wanted to make is that misinformation is often really not about the health crisis itself. So we did some research on the Ebola in the US, the communication crisis around Ebola in 2014. And in this case, we saw more often that tweets containing misinformation more often promoted discourse, promoted discord, they were political, and they were more risk increasing, right? So there's a social, political, or financial goal here. And in this case, the health event of the time is really the more salient issue that people are paying attention to. It's sort of like the moving vehicle that all these other pieces can hop onto and use that to gain attention. So keep that in mind. Other thing to keep in mind is that health-related misinformation, disinformation starts very early. So some more research we did on early tweets about the pandemic showed that the first tweet sharing COVID vaccine misinformation in our data set was shared on January 29th, 2020. That was before the pandemic was even declared. So, these things start early. It's hard to get all the way ahead of them, but we can start earlier. And then I want to talk a little bit here about scientific uncertainty and coordinated manipulation. Now, these are not the same thing, obviously, but that one can allow for openings for the other. So scientific uncertainty is the limits of data and reliability with the truth sort of falling within a range of possible values. Like science lets us get closer to the truth, right? But there's always some uncertainty. And sometimes it's a lot of uncertainty, and sometimes it's a little bit. And we're always learning more in science. And so this is something where, hey, here's the best information we have right now, but that could change. But because there is changing information, because there's uncertainty, there are openings for other sort of nefarious actors to take advantage. And one of these ways is through coordinated manipulation. And this is a synchronized and orchestrated activity from multiple sources. And this is to generate influence or an outcome. And so, some things are like, if there's a really synchronized, like if different accounts sort of start tweeting the same things, if they're fake and new accounts, they recycle the same information, they cite in a circular way. So I'm going to cite this person who cites this person who cites back to the original source, and all of a sudden it starts looking legit, but in fact it's really just a circle of like a few people citing each other. So these things can sort of be going on, and I think one example that we can see here is some of the disinformation that we see at the Biological Weapons Convention. And so we can see some sources who are accusing others of doing things like creating bioweapons labs, say things like, which is untrue, say things like, they use a lot of scientific and technical info to put people on certain paths of thinking. They provide, kind of fake evidence, a lot of patents, and sort of suggestion of nefarious activity. They appeal to your emotions, or they cite sort of what they would call authoritative sources, but they're really sort of not really that legitimate, or they're misquoted, and also claims of secrecy and neglect, questions have been ignored kind of thing. And so these types of things are an example of sort of coordinated and inauthentic activity. You can also see, there's some sort of repeating tactics that we can see over time. So we refer to past crises. Maybe we say like, oh, this is just like Chernobyl, or saying other organizations, like international organizations, are puppets. So you can see these things happening, sort of, like I said before, there are the same things being used over and over again to undermine different sort of legitimate uses of science. So in the chat, you can feel free to post any examples that you can think of or have seen of coordinated manipulation, or if there are warning signs that you look for when you are trying to figure out what's going on. We'd love to hear from you in the chat. And as you're doing that, I just have a couple more slides that I wanted to share with you, and then I'll toss it back to Rosalia. But I want to talk about some potential interventions and how we solve these problems. So, we have this research here talking with the 4IFACT model, thinking about how do we intervene? What are the places for intervening? So it can be at the information level, right, where we amplify factual information or we debunk false information. We can intervene at the individual level, where we try to enhance information literacy, debunk, inoculate people against bad information. And then we can also have the interpersonal or community level, right? This is more about community engagement. And then finally, the institutional structural level, that's more about policy and legislation. And so I think at this point, it's not just one solution, right? It's a constellation of imperfect solutions that we can, work on various levels for. Feel free to check out the Center for Health Security's Trust Project. This is tackling rumors and understanding and strengthening trust in public health. There's a lot of different resources that we have up there, including videos and other documents. Here's one great document for you to check out, the practical playbook. Actually, at this point, sorry, this is needs to be updated. It's the practical playbook for addressing health rumors. Just because misinformation is sometimes sometimes is a polarizing word. So it's guidance for addressing misinformation and rumors, provides tools and templates, but of course, it's not a perfect solution. And so that's all I've got for you today. And I believe I will, stop my share. There we go. And toss it back to you, Rosalia.
Thank you, Dr. Tara Taxel. Thank you for those remarks and for giving us, at the end, ways in which we can intervene in looking at misinformation and disinformation in various forms. And now I'd like to hand it back to Gloria. The co-moderator also came on board. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Tara, for that, giving us a clear difference between misinformation, disinformation, malinformation, and thank you for that. Please, I'd like to urge everyone to leave your comments, your questions, specify who you are directing your comments and questions to at the chat box, so that when we get to that discussion segment, we can open it up for discussion. Meanwhile, we'll invite the second speaker, who will be talking about emerging technologies as drivers and solutions. Emerging technologies as drivers and solutions. And I would like to invite Dr. Justin Overcash, who is a technical expert in genetic biocontrol, regulation, and policy with the Gene Convene Global Collaborative at the Foundation for the National Institutes of Health, FNIH. His work focuses on strengthening the governance, risk assessment, and possible development of emerging biotechnologies, particularly genetic biocontrol approaches intended to address challenges in public health, agriculture, and environment management. Justin, you are welcome on board. Over to you.
Thank you, Gloria. Thank you very much. And thank you to the sponsors for inviting me to talk today. I think, let me know if you guys can see my slides. Hopefully.
Yes, we can see your slides.
Okay, perfect. I think the first question you might be wondering, all right, what's this genetic biocontrol technology person talking about AI? So beyond my background is in genetics. I did spend 5-6 years as a regulator at the U.S. Department of Agriculture, and I've been with the Foundation for the National Institute of Health for about coming up on 2 years now. And I think increasingly as my career has gone on, there's been an integrated component that has to do with artificial intelligence. That is because I think it's one of the most powerful emerging technologies. Willie invited me to come talk a little bit about how artificial intelligence might play a role in misinformation and disinformation, and I was more than happy to oblige because I think it is an extremely important topic. And so before I get started, I want to do a little bit of framing, just so I'm transparent and out there. I am kind of a pro AI person. I think there's tremendous capabilities that we're going to see in the future with respect to capacity building, things like risk assessment. I think it's going to be a real game changer, but there are some potential downsides. And I think that has to do, I mean, one of the obvious ones is misinformation and disinformation. But I also wanted to note that this is not necessarily a new challenge as much as it is a challenge that we faced before, but at a greater magnitude and maybe a greater sophistication. So one of the questions I always get whenever I'm talking about AI and risk assessment is, what if the AI is wrong or hallucinates? And one of the questions I always ask back is, have you ever met a person that is wrong, or maybe says something that isn't so true? And I think the previous speakers have kind of covered this. This has been around for a long time. I think AI is just a new tool which we're going to have to grapple with and kind of changes the magnitude of the problem. So the way I only have a few slides, 3 slides, but I wanted to kind of cover some of the challenges that AI is posing, some solutions that I think AI is going to play a role in dealing with misinformation and disinformation. And then lastly, I wanted to talk a little bit about what I think the future could be like, hopefully, from an optimistic lens. So the first one that I wanted to cover is AI video generation. Maybe throw in the chat if someone has ever sent you an AI generated video and been like, look at this crazy thing this person says. I know I get them all the time from friends and family members, especially when it has to do with genetic technologies. They'll be like, I saw this on this platform, and they'll be like, is this true? And very often, especially nowadays, when it's so easy to make AI generated videos, it's either a deep fake or it's completely fabricated. And AI is getting to the point where it's getting more and more difficult to tell. So there is certainly a challenge with AI video generation. Another one is hallucinated articles. So one thing, we track news related to genetic biocontrol technologies, and we're seeing this more and more often, where someone will write an article and then someone else will kind of, what appears to be pretty obviously, take that article and then they'll maybe throw it in an AI and have it tweak some things. And when you're dealing with kind of certain technologies like genetic biocontrol, very often the AI is not super good at distinguishing the nuances in the technology. So you have some kind of misinformation seeps into the article. So you'll see over time, as these kind of articles get kind of repeated and pushed through the system, so to speak, you'll see more misinformation or in things that are incorrect or put into the articles. So that's certainly a challenge. It also, I think, associated with that, with the use of AI, people are able to rapidly put out articles. So, right, one of the great things about AI is you can rapidly develop text, but that also means that the quality of some of the articles has gone down significantly, especially with respect to science. Another thing that I think is important is what most people know. I know it is bot farming or botting the algorithm. So you'll see this, right? You'll have folks that will put out a piece of misinformation and then they'll get a bunch of engagement. Now that engagement isn't necessarily authentic, especially if they're planning it out. That engagement could be basically bots. So these are non-humans that go in and engage, leave a comment, like, retweet, whatever it is your preferred platform does. They'll go in and they'll do that. And that can be a huge problem because it can take a message that no one really thinks is a big deal. And then you get a bunch of artificial engagement, and that artificial engagement kind of pops off with the algorithm. And then a bunch of real people start seeing it and they're like, oh, I wonder if this is true. So that's certainly a challenge. And then the last one that I think is not necessarily a huge challenge right now, but I think will become more and more of a challenge is what I call antagonistic AI agents. So before, bots have been around for a while, and you can kind of program them to go in and leave. You'll see often you'll be like, all right, these are bots because people leave comments on posts and they're almost word for word the same. But I think as kind of these AI agents become more sophisticated, you're going to see not only a bot that can go in and like and engage, but one that can go in and follow certain people and continually be combative with them in a unique way, almost emulating someone that is, antagonistic to your views, but they'll be able to respond to your replies and provide counter arguments, all that kind of stuff. So I think we're going to see that more and more often as well. And dealing with that will be a challenge. So those are some of the challenges. Obviously, there's other challenges. One of the great things about AI, which is kind of a double-edged sword, is that kind of if you have the imagination and the creativity to put it to work on something, it can do it. So I imagine there's some other ways that it can be used as well to spread information that isn't necessarily accurate. But enough of, I think, the doom and the gloom. I do think that there is some ways that AI is going to be used to deal with misinformation and be used in a positive sense. So one of the things is on-demand fact checking. So I do this quite often. I'll see something and I'll plug it into a GPT or a Claude or a Grok and see, what is the context of this short little video. I know I have a personal experience. I have a family member that will send me a bunch of stuff that's on X, and they'll be like, is this real? And very often I'll be like, on X they have something called the Grok button, so it's in the upper right corner, and if you hit it, it'll give the context. Now, could the Grok AI be biased? Yes, very plausibly. But the concept is, all right, you have a video, it's on a social media program. Can you use AI to give you more context around the video? Is it accurate? Is it being clipped in a certain way? And I think that is going to be a powerful tool in the future and will be extremely important. Rapid detection at scale. So one of the things, right, people will put out maybe a piece of information that isn't quite true, and then it starts spreading around. I think the faster you can identify that piece of information and potentially address it, or whatever your planned action is, the better. So the sooner the better. And I think AI, with its ability to go through and effectively scrape all of these posts and stuff like that at scale, is going to be extremely important for flagging suspect content, as well as bot behavior. So you can use the AI to fight the AI. And then thirdly, this is a little bit optimistic, but I think it's going to be the case. I think there's going to be kind of a renaissance in education. We're already starting to see it a little bit in some schools that have implemented AI in terms of tutoring students. But one of the great things about AI, and this is going to be extremely important for capacity building as well, is that you effectively have expert tutors for individuals. So if you have a system that's set up that kind of teaches students and professionals to think critically and become a little bit more, I think, less susceptible to misinformation and disinformation, that's going to be important. And I think AI is going to allow folks to kind of be like, learn, when you see something online, how do you determine whether or not it's true? How can you fact check it? How can you, look at an opposing opinion? And I think AI in education is going to be really important for kind of teaching people how to do that, but also giving them the tools to do that. So I think there is an optimistic case to be made. And then in terms of the future state, which, I mean, I guess we'll see as the years goes on where things go. But I do think one of the things about AI, people always talk about, oh, we have a new model, it's able to do this and this. There's kind of really, when it comes to AI, there's two things which make AI valuable. One is the model, the other is the data that it's trained on. So I think as we move more and more into an AI future, the data that it's trained on will become more and more valuable. So if you're able to show that you're a credible data source, right? That you're well cited, that you have a high integrity, it's going to become a premium. And I think, right, instead of, I'm sure people have heard of AI slop. I think we want to avoid the AI slop, and as we move into the future, journalists, databases, communicators that have data sets that are well cited and not filled with misinformation or disinformation are going to become even more and more valuable. And so I think there's something to that. I think that's a healthy pressure that we're going to see. The second thing is healthy skepticism. And I already see this a little bit. I imagine some folks probably feel this as well. With more and more AI content, I personally am less and less likely to believe some of the things that are sent to me, just because AI is so good at faking things, and that kind of makes me a little bit more skeptical of the things that I see. I think a certain amount of skepticism is a healthy thing. So I imagine as there's more and more AI kind of outputs, hopefully people's skepticism grows with that as well, and maybe they'll question whether or not what they're seeing online is true, or if it's just someone driving a secret agenda. So I think that's going to be great. And then another thing is human work gains scarcity value. So what do I mean by that? We see this a little bit with AI and art. So I think right now there a lot of folks are using AI to generate art. I used AI to generate stuff for PowerPoint slides all the time. I used AI to generate these slides. In fact, I can't speak French. I couldn't translate it, but it was able to translate them into French. But I think we're going to see in the future a premium on like human-made content, because it's not just generated, it has in 15 minutes, there's value that gets put into it. And I think that's going to be the case probably also for journalism. So if you're a journalist and you cite your stuff well, and you've written up this piece, I think there's going to be more value put on that than just an AI generated article. So I think there's going to be some value in that as well. So I think there's a a good place for fantastic journalists to communicate science and in kind of a very detailed way. It's going to be even more valuable in the future than it is today because of AI. So with that, a few takeaways. The hazard is old. I don't think that this is a new thing. I think, right, the AI is just changing the magnitude. People are able to just pump out a bunch of content and flood the zone, so to speaking, with bots and engagement. AI is currently the only tool that matches the problem speed and scale. So I am a big fan of, right, if you have an AI problem, think about how AI can be used to combat that problem. I think that's one of the only ways, or it's not one of the only ways, but it is a good way of dealing with it. And then in the long run, I think equilibrium is going to reward credibility and integrity, and it's going to put a higher value on things that are done well rather than just synthesized off the cliff with AI. So those are my thoughts on AI, and I am looking forward to the discussion later on.
All right, thank you so much, Justin. Yes, indeed, AI is a topical issue and very interesting because of what you have outlined. And I saw in the comments there are questions waiting for you, which we are going to discuss during the next session. So before we move on, I'd like to introduce my co-moderator, Arauna Wadrego. Yes, my co-moderator, Arana, please, I'd like you to introduce you to talk to the panelists and the participants to post their comment, their thoughts and questions in the chat also. So Arana is a lawyer with, I think, Burkina Faso Regulatory Agency. You're welcome.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Gloria. My name is Aruna Widrago. Sorry for my late. I have a difficulty to join the meeting. So I'll go to the chat box and ask the participant questions. Umma Wanzala to everyone. Umma Wanzala want to know, how do we address the issues of attitude among journalists who are supposed to educate the public on GMOs, but personal biases toward the adoption of the technology? And the other one, Ivan Kipkori, was saying that as AI generated content become increasingly realistic, do you think regulation alone is sufficient, or is public digital literacy the more sustainable solution? Joy Kabaka, I want to know, how is social media changing the spread of biotechnology, emerging technology, misinformation, and are there successful counter strategies? And the second question is, what ethical safeguards are most important when communicating technology that may affect further generation? The third is, what type of evidence-based story do you think is urgently needed right now to improve the public understanding of genetic biocontrol technology in Africa? And also Joy Kabaka want to know, how can cultural narrative be incorporated into reporting on emerging technology so that communication strengthen trust rather than fuel disinformation? And Fiona Akelo, I want to know, what tools can he use to fact check AI generated content? And Vincent Obondo, interesting presentation, Justin presentation. Sandra Lombe said that very insightful presentation. So that are the question in the chat board people want to address to the panelists. So Gloria, I will let you to continue the moderation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Arauna. We'll move straight to the next panelist, And this session, we'll be looking at the life sciences, public trust, and evidence communication. For this session, we'll be exploring misinformation risk in vaccines, genomics, clinical research, biotechnology, biosecurity, and public health. And I would like to invite Dr. Peter Babingumira, who is an epidemic intelligence analyst at the Ugandan National Institute of Public Health. He supports epidemic intelligence, border health, and disarmament policy in Uganda. He also serves as a director of policy and strategic partnerships at Neo Bioscience, a contributor to BWC working groups and health security networks. He focuses on biosurveillance, dual use governance, and advancing Africa's capacity in global biosecurity and non-proliferation efforts. All right, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. First and foremost, can you hear me well?
Yes, we can.
Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. Good evening, good morning, wherever you are. I'd like to thanks to Rosalia, the moderators, and thanks to AGBC and the Elizabeth R. briefing program. Erin, so good to see you virtually this time for having me. So my name is Peter Babigumira Hawe, and over the next few minutes, I want to talk about where the life sciences and public trust collide. That is vaccine, genomics, biosecurity, clinical research, and what we as scientists and communicators can actually do. So it's not really going to be a theoretical talk because a lot of the predecessors have covered richly the theory, but I really just want to show you that based on even some of the analysis from what you guys had, you'll be able to recognize from your own words some of these thematic issues. Next slide. Yeah, so before we go further, let's get our definitions right. Because, you know, when you look at the theme of today, truth under the microscope, it really depends on this distinction. And I just want to reiterate what was mentioned earlier by other colleagues, that when false information is spread without knowledge, but rather without knowingly intending to cause harm, that's misinformation, and it's common, it's all around us. My own mom is like, and her, you know, my aunties, it's all they ever do on WhatsApp, sending you all these rumors and fake news, because, you know, but this is someone who genuinely believes, but they're not trying to deceive someone. While this information is full of malicious intent to deceive, mislead, or cause harm. And while it's less common, it has the much greater risk. So think of those people who intentionally share fabricated WHO links or UNICEF, where they have changed the URL using, you know, those shortening things. So it's important that we understand this, because both undermine trust and both can undermine outbreak response. The label changes how we respond. With misinformation, usually it calls for correction, while disinformation calls for monitoring, verification, and sometimes escalation to relevant authorities. But this does not change the urgency. Effective risk communication systems really have to detect and address false information quickly, regardless of which one we are dealing with. Next slide. So where exactly does the life sciences sit inside this bigger information crisis? I want to highlight these 4 areas. Now, you know, with vaccines, you have safety and efficacy claims that spread faster than corrections can. And vaccine hesitancy is a real epidemic, and it has massive consequences. We've seen it play out during the different epidemics. Secondly, genomics and the GMOs. There are so many different things people say. For example, GMOs cause cancer, GMOs interfere with our DNA. These claims persist despite decades of evidence To the contrary, they don't die. They just resurface in a new form every few years. And then with biosecurity, which is very close to my own work, you know, gene drives and the GM mosquito rumors get framed as covert experimentation on communities. And this is one of the most persistent and damaging narratives we deal with in Africa, especially. I'll show you an example in a few minutes. And finally, clinical research, you know, trial data, regulatory delay. These are normal parts of due diligence, but they get framed as cover-ups, concealment, and people read silence as guilt. So the common thread across all four is that public trust in science is built or eroded in exactly the same channels where real health decisions get made. The WhatsApp groups, the Facebook groups, radio calls, radio call-in shows, that's the terrain we're operating in. So I wanted to just have this snapshot from the data that Rosalia mentioned in the beginning. I was quite intrigued, specifically from some of your responses, that 62.7% of you say they encounter life science misinformation frequently, not occasionally. You know, that means this is a daily reality for those of you in the room. And 68.6 say that your biggest challenge is explaining complex science to the public. 68.8% say that responding to misinformation once it's already out is a top challenge. And 35.3%, which is more than a third, tell us that you cannot yet confidently determine misinformation, disinformation, and malinformation, which is exactly really why we started with the definitions. But the numbers are only part of the story. And if we really look at what you actually described experiencing, like those fabricated WHO links, the GMO claims, you really realize that it's not an abstract topic, but it's something that's already sitting in your inboxes and in your group chats right now. Next slide. So I want to talk a little bit about why these claims hold. I think the next slide, the one which says why these claims hold. That one, yes. So why do they hold and why do people spread them? So these are actually two different questions, and I'll treat them separately. Because again, I gave you in the beginning, mis versus disinformation, and they have different motives. So on why it takes hold, first of all, technical distance. Things like gene drives, genomics, vaccine science, they're genuinely hard to explain in plain language, and that gap gets filled by simpler, scarier stories. Second, real historical harm. Past unethical research means secret experimentation. So the claims are immediately plausible to people because in some cases, something like it actually happened before. Third, the fabricated authority. A fake WHO link borrows the credibility of a real institution. And fourth, silence reads as confirmation. When we don't respond quickly, people take it that the silence is evidence that the claim is true. Now, on the other side, why do people spread this information, especially deliberately? And if you look at the UK government's Resist to Counter the Information toolkit, they have a very nice list, I feel, and it's worth looking at. So people spread false claims because they believe it or they want it to be true, because they agree with something or want it changed, to undermine the credibility of a person or an organization or a course of action, to advance a political, religious, economic, or cultural goal, for money or financial advantage, for attention. Some people just want to be heard, or for online status. And sometimes, honestly, just for fun or mischief. If you notice, sometimes you can find very heated online conversations on X or Instagram, and there'll be that random guy who's like, check out my music CD, or if you need chairs, come to my shop. So why would someone add that to the trail? They're trying to get famous. Next slide. So basically, understanding which of the drivers or which of the things is driving a specific claim usually tells you how to respond to it. And again, when we take back that snapshot to the pre-webinar assessment, there's one thing which here for me, I think matters more than anything. So We talked a little bit about confidence, that is from 1 to 5, across 4 skills, that is explaining complex science, and of which 49% of you rated yourselves confident, identifying misinformation, 47%, responding to misinformation, 37%, and then communicating scientific uncertainty, 37%. Look at this drop. Look at it just drop, drop, drop. So communicating uncertainty is definitely the weakest skill in the room. And that is true even though most people here are journalists or science communication folks, people whose job literally is to explain things clearly. So here's why that matters most. This is the exact skill that misinformation exploits. When evidence is genuinely evolving, when we honestly don't have the full picture, an unclear or hesitant signal from scientists doesn't stay empty, it gets filled. And it gets filled by the confident false one. So if we can't communicate uncertainty well, someone else will fill the space for us, and they won't be constrained by the truth. So what do we actually do about this? I want to offer a simple 3-stage framework: prepare, detect, and respond. So this is the same cycle veterinary and public health specialists use for outbreak-linked disinformation, and it applies just as well in life sciences broadly. So prepare. Raise awareness of threats and put agile plans and capacities in place before you need them. Train your teams, run tabletop exercises so that people recognize threat early, not only after they've spread, and build what is called cognitive resilience in people and institutions so that when a claim does surface, your organization isn't caught flat-footed. Detect. This is about social listening. So WHO runs something called EIOS. I was introduced as an epidemic intelligence analyst, and this is a platform that I use. So open sources, mines, media, and social sources as well for emerging risks in real time. UNICEF also has a similar tool called the Vaccine Demand Observatory, and their website, thev.org, centralizes misinformation alerts specifically around vaccines. And underneath both of these is the more basic, building trust and communications and connections with communities so that you can actually hear about problems early before they explode. And finally, responding. And I know many of these things were mentioned before, so I'll breeze through them. But yeah, pre-banking where you can, inoculating people with facts before disinformation has a chance to fill the void. When you have to correct something directly, use what is called the truth sandwich. Lead with a fact, name the myth just once. Don't repeat it over and over again. Explain clearly why it's false and restate the fact again. And work through trusted messengers and media fact-checking allies, because the message often lands better coming from someone the community already trusts. So remember this: prepare, detect, and respond. So in practice, if you look at the case of the GMO mosquito, the WHO link rumor, so this is one of the participants really raised this as something. So step 1, the claim spreads. A WhatsApp group posted GMO mosquitoes cause human sterility, carrying a fraudulent link that looks like a WHO website. Step 2, panic scales. Nearly 1,000 group members start debating and claiming, and fear outpaces anyone actually stopping to check the source. Step 3, this is where we come in with our framework. Detect. The communicator, who is you, traces the link and confirms it's not the real one. It's not who.int. That verification step is everything. Without it, you're arguing about the claim itself instead of exposing the fabrication. Step 4, which is respond, and specifically the truth sandwich. You, the communicator, leads with the actual biology and the public health purpose of GM mosquitoes, the fact. You name the sterility myth once, you don't dwell on it. You don't repeat it 5 times. You explain why it is false. Then you restate the safety review process that these products go through, closing with a fact again. Step 5, trust is redirected. So the group discussion shifts back towards credible evidence-based sources, and that's the entire cycle from a real WhatsApp group to nearly 1,000 frightened people to resolution in the span of what is probably a single afternoon of careful, calm work. So, in conclusion, the last slide. In conclusion, it's been an honor to, talk to you, and I just want to leave you with this. Trust in the life sciences is not defended by winning arguments. Don't take things personal. It's built by preparing, detecting, and responding with your evidence, with your answer and your uncertainty before a rumor does. So I'll hand this back to Gloria and Aruna for the transition into our panel discussion. But I leave you with a question, really. What's the most urgent misinformation or disinformation challenge in your own field? Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for that clarity, Dr. Peter. I'd like to really thank all the panelists who has really shared very informative, stirred up the discussion, clear distinction between misinformation, disinformation, malinformation. I know we have so many of us, we have heard of misinformation, disinformation, but malinformation is something that is, gathering. So thank you so much. I would like to invite my co-moderator, Arauna, once again to give one or two statements in French for our participants, our French-speaking participants joining us today. Arauna?
Yes. Okay. Thank you, Dr. Gloria, for the floor. Ok, je vais parler en français. Donc, comme je le disais tantôt, c'est Ouedraogo Aruna du Burkina Faso. Alors, nous avons des participants francophones. Donc, il est demandé que ces participants-là puissent poser leurs questions dans la partie du box là où c'est mis questions. Voilà, si vous avez des questions concernant un peu la thématique du jour, c'est-à-dire lutter contre la désinformation, la mésinformation en ce qui concerne les technologies émergentes. C'est le lieu de, en tout cas, poser vos différentes questions afin que nous puissions demander aux différents panélistes d'apporter des éléments d'éclaircissement. Donc, merci bien, Dr. Gloria. Je pense que pour l'instant, nous n'avons pas de questions particulières venant des participants francophones. Donc, je vais vous remettre la parole pour poursuivre la modération. Merci.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much, Arauna. So we'll move straight to the panel discussion where we have our panelists. I would like to invite our panelists once again, Dr. Tara, Dr. Justin, and Dr. Peter. We have questions that have been posted on the comments on the chat section. However, would like to open the floor at this point for discussions, so to say. So we'll start with the comments at the chat on the chat. So I'll just move to that. All right. So
and then Gloria, one moment, yes. As you go to the chat, we'd just like to send an apology to our Francophone speaking participants. We had promised translation, but technical challenges have met our translator. So apologies for that. We'll look into that in the next webinar, which will be next week. Back to you, Gloria, and merci beaucoup.
Thank you so much, Rosalia. Okay, yes. So okay, I have Raphael asking what role should the media play in reducing misinformation about emerging technology? As a media practitioner, as a communicator, as a journalist, what role should the media play in reducing misinformation in emerging biotechnologies? Also, how can science communicators address misinformation that exaggerates the risks, generated from of genetic biocontrol? All right. This is asking about science communicators and how misinformation can be addressed. Okay. Evans is saying, as AI-generated content becomes increasingly realistic, so this is to Dr. Justin, do you think regulation alone is sufficient, or is public digital literacy the more sustainable solution? So I've heard of this, being raised severally. Is regulation sufficient? Or do we ensure we have better public digital literacy? All right. So Joy is asking, how is social media changing the spread of biotechnology or emerging technologies, misinformation and misinformation, and are there successful counter strategies? That she's asking what has been done before, what strategies can we use, what strategies have been employed anywhere globally that can be used to tackle the issues of misinformation, and what ethical safeguards are most important when communicating technologies that may affect future generations. Okay, so this question is in threefold, and I'm seeing a third one that says, what type of evidence-based stories do you think is urgently needed right now to improve the public understanding of genetic biocontrol in Africa? She's also asking, how can cultural narratives be incorporated into reporting on emerging technologies so that communication strengthens trust rather than fuels disinformation? Okay, so Fiona is also asking about AI. What tools can I use to fact check AI generated content? All right, so I will now invite, while the questions keep coming, I would like to invite the panelists. I will start with Dr. Tara to respond to some of the questions addressed to you. Before you start, I would like to, like I mentioned, malinformation, yes, is something that, is gathering momentum. A clear distinction between malinformation and, disinformation, will also be helpful. Over to you, Dr. Tara.
So disinformation is, I'll start with that last one. So the difference between malinformation and disinformation is that disinformation is fabricated content that is sort of used, in a way that is disingenuous and untrue. Malinformation is true information that is used in a way that is negative or to hurt someone. So like the example, it's maybe emails that are actually real emails, but it's cherry picking pieces out of them to use them maliciously. So that's the distinction there. Sometimes, I'm saying like it's a very clear distinction. Sometimes it's a whole mix of things. Sometimes it's like, well, here's how I perceive that true event. So it kind of starts mixing together, but that's the sort of the definition distinction. I will let someone else. I see that I have two questions for my section, but I won't just go on and talk. We can sort of have a conversation here. I know Justin had a very specific question asked to him, so I'll pass it to you, Justin.
Sure. So let me respond first to as AI generated content becomes increasingly realistic, do you think regulation alone is sufficient, or is public digital literacy the most sustainable solution? So I think regulation, I think it depends on where you are. I think, right, the European Union has some regulations. We have, I think, very little regulations here in the United States. It's kind of being treated like social media. So my gut instinct is that public digital literacy is going to be more sustainable in the future. I think as people, I kind of mentioned, as people see more and more AI content, and as soon as someone gets duped by a piece of AI content, I feel like hopefully they become a little bit more skeptical of the things that they see online. But I think definitely public digital literacy is probably more sustainable. Regardless, I think there should be aspects of both included in whatever the solution is to deal with it. And then I think I can quickly answer the second one, which was what tools can I use to help identify or deal with AI content? So in terms of a tool, I think I mentioned AI is pretty good for dealing with AI. Kind of like identifies like. You can use AI, and I do this all the time. If I see an article and I'll plug it in, whether it's, sometimes I'll plug it into multiple AIs, whether it's Claude or GPT, and be like, all right, tell me a little bit more about this article. What's true in it? What's not true? If you're going to say something's true, cite it, provide a clickable link to cite it. So there's certainly ways that you can use AI to kind of interrogate the truth of a piece of media. But then I also think, in terms of tools, like find credible sources of information that you can rely on, and use those as a backdrop for whenever you come across something. It's good to have, and it's a little bit difficult these days just because there's so many people providing so much information. But I think as soon as you find a credible source of information, it's a good thing to be able to lean on that source of information.
Okay, yeah, thank you so much, Justin. Yes, I'm saying Dr. Tara.
Yeah, I think that, we have what Justin said about using different tools is so important. But I want to emphasize one of the sort of the questions that was asked, like what role should the media play in reducing information about emerging biotechnologies? The media can use the tools that Justin has mentioned, but I want to emphasize how important the media is in this in this area, right? Because, if you think about labs or universities or other organizations who try to put out, information about what they're doing to be safe in their labs, or how they're, being thoughtful about emerging technologies, I think that no one reads that. People read news articles, and they read the materials that our audience members and others are producing, and it's such an important secondary messenger. So I think it's really, you can't understate how critical a partner the media is in reducing misinformation about those technologies. And I think the next question here is really about when misinformation exaggerates the risk of technologies, but there are genuine public concerns. I think that we need to really be thoughtful and have humility about the concerns that people have. I think that happened with the vaccine during COVID, that people had concerns and people were like, no, it's safe, don't worry about it. But it's like, hey, just answer people's questions. Be clear and truthful and transparent. Be able to say what you know, what you don't know, and what you're doing to figure out more information. These things are so critical when we're communicating about risk, because people have legitimate questions. And when we dismiss them as like, oh, that's a dumb question, people are just like, oh, you don't care about me. Why should I listen to you? So it's really important to sort of engage with these questions, and answer them. But also, as we're doing that, not amplify the misinformation. Say like, oh, people are concerned about this, but here's, what is really happening. So that's a couple kind of comments from me there.
Yeah, thank you so much, Tara and Justin. Indeed, the media is a critical partner in reducing misinformation. The media, that is why it is important to ensure that as journalists, as communicators, we are armed with the right information in order to, so to say, mitigate the spread of misinformation, disinformation, or malinformation, as it were. I'll now invite Dr. Peter to give responses to some of the questions that are posed to you.
Gloria, I'm sorry, could you maybe repeat, because the questions were not specific. Sorry.
Okay, so yes, the questions were not specific, but I just, all right, so let me look at the questions again. I know that, okay, so let's see. Okay, this question on what types of evidence story based or okay, all right. So let me go to this question. The question on the spread of biotechnology, emerging technologies, misinformation, successful counter strategies. Are there successful counter strategies? What ethical safeguards are most important in communicating technologies, and what types of evidence-based stories? So I don't know if you could
Yeah, sure.
help. Yeah.
So, I mean, like Tara will tell you, uh, misinformation happens at different levels. So, I partly support the Biological Weapons Convention work in Geneva. The kind of misinformation that targets a diplomat in Geneva is very different from the one that targets my mother back home in Kampala. And you do not you do not find someone trying to encourage vaccine hesitancy in diplomats, but rather you're trying to get them to lose faith in the international system, to lose interest in attending negotiations, to take difficult positions on some issues because they have a skewed kind of understanding. So any mitigation strategy depends on really the trigger. So, for example, when it comes to your policymakers, your leaders, there may be a particularly effective vaccine that can help a lot of people. Like, for example, I think in Kampala, in Uganda, they have already started work on a malaria vaccine. I know right now in Kampala as well, they are doing some vaccine trials for the Bundibujo Ebola virus. So this is something that could have a lot of benefit. And definitely the Ministry of Health is expected that by now should have, remember what I talked about, prevent, detect, and respond. The Ministry of Health should have identified those at-risk groups who probably would be targeted by misinformation. They should be working with the media houses to make sure the key facts documents, the frequently asked questions, the clips, the videos are already produced and ready. They shouldn't wait until like 3 months into the vaccine trial, you start hearing that they're experimenting Ebola vaccines on Ugandans. So it's just a simple example of how, if I know there's a big meeting in Geneva and they are going to be negotiating a treaty on plastics or on pathogen access and benefit sharing, and it's in December, then I must know that most likely between now and December, I have to monitor, which is the second step, monitor to detect if there are specific pieces of information that are making people to think that whatever is going to happen in Geneva is with a bad effect, that those diplomats have been misled, they have been bought off, and things like that. So, like the framework which I presented of prevent, detect, and respond, whether it's my mom back at home in Kampala who just celebrated 80, I know they'll target her to not, take her medicine, to just rely on herbs only, to not go and see a doctor, versus my ambassador in Geneva, who maybe they will target the embassy there to think that maybe these issues that could be important are not that important. So the framework is general, but I think it's a case-by-case application. And the example I gave was really something that you see in the average WhatsApp group every day. Over.
Yeah, thank you so much, Peter. Yes, when it comes to WhatsApp platform and groups, a lot of information are shared that are very misleading, so to say. All right, so let me just read from Nelly. She's saying, thank you for all the insightful presentation. We live in a world that is inundated with so much information. Maintaining information integrity is becoming a challenge. It's becoming a challenge since the time we find the truth, the lie is done in several rounds and all that. We also have several channels of personalities offering information. It's able to shrink, but all right, that's not a question. Okay, so I have a question here. It says from Medina, it says, how can the media prevent optimism at the beginning of any emerging technology life cycle? This is challenging because when emerging technologies emerge at the beginning, all the information about new technologies comes from developers, which understandably will be optimistic about them, focusing on benefits and subconsciously underplaying risk. By the time harms get discussed by affected communities, several regulators and policymakers may have already formed an opinion due to early techno-optimistic reports. All right, so okay, I have a question from on AI by Osa Savadogo. He said, going forward, AI is becoming the easiest and most accessible source of information for everyone, which I quite agree, including top political decision makers. So the real question is how to get accurate, credible information into AI. Getting credible information into AI. Okay, Justin, I hope you got that question. Now, all right. So the first question on how the media can prevent techno-optimism at the beginning of an emerging technology life cycle. So I will invite either Tara or Peter. Tara, you can lend in your response before Peter comes in, before we respond to the question on AI.
For this one, I'll let Peter go first, just because that's a little more his specialty than mine.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm sorry, Gloria, could you please repeat the question?
So the question says, how can the media prevent techno-optimism at the beginning of every emerging technology life cycle?
Okay, so I mean, you know, I think, well, it's a good question, but for me, I go back to the basics. Is that the role of the media? Because ideally, there should be an interplay between one, the governments that run the country, the universities, the academia, the researchers who tell us the facts of life, the businesses that invest in what the researchers say is important to us, and eventually us, the consumers. But sometimes when we try to overly legislate everything, we create a lot of work. For example, some people are gamblers, meaning that even if you tell them a particular media, a particular technology, we do not have sufficient evidence to believe that technology is as game changing as you think. They want to be, the first people invested in Apple. So would you put the burden on the media to run show after show trying to convince people to do something that they don't want to do? I take you back to the slide I had on why people spread misinformation. Sometimes there is that confirmation bias. The thing is confirming something that they want to be true. And there's not much media houses can do about that. I think all they can do is to present unbiased, impartial platforms whereby they can bring the overly optimistic people, they can bring the underly optimistic people, they can bring the regulators, they can bring the people who don't even believe it in at all, and do a good panel, unbiased. They are not advocating for anything, and then leave it to the audience to decide. We heard from the people who believe, we heard from the people who don't believe, we heard from the people who are trying to regulate it. Let's make informed decisions. So I wouldn't want us to make the job of media advocacy, but I would want us to make sure that media just ensures we make informed decisions. Whether it's health, whether it's tech, I think sometimes we expect too much from the media to become like judge, jury, and executioner and to pick up all these moral things. But I think if they are just committed to constantly providing platforms, whether it's through print media or through digital media or through TV and radio, that provide unbiased opportunities for people to learn and make informed decisions over.
I think what a great point, that a series of points that Peter makes there. I think that that's so critical, that the media there is there for an unbiased information source. I also want to add to that, although it was just a great complete answer, just that there are some considerations that we should make on figuring out what types of misinformation or misleading information we might want to address, because there's a lot out there, right? But we can't boil the ocean. So we have to choose, if we're trying to sort of debunk or go after misleading information, we want to make sure that it's really worth the time, effort, the risk of amplifying it, that we have enough resources to actually do the job well, that it is in fact harmful. Is it just annoying or is it harmful? So all of these considerations can go into whether this, thinking like, all right, this is really something we have to push back on, or is it something that, we should sort of just present information and move along with, towards something that's a little more, that may be more harmful.
Yes, thank you so much, Peter and Tara. I agree.
Gloria, sorry, just one more
yes.
thing. Also, sometimes when the media gives too much attention to something that's not really something, it has a negative effect of actually blowing it up. So sometimes the media's best option is to not give too much attention, to empty bubbles over.
I agree completely, Peter and Tara, because it's important for the media to really understand and to really sieve out what information is worth amplifying and what information is not worth amplifying, in order not to create public tension. So to say, sieve out myth from facts and what's the truth from what is not the truth. I agree completely. Justin, we have a lot of questions coming in, so I'll Justin, very briefly, to respond to the question on the AI. What credible information? So how to get credible and accurate information into AI? That is the question now.
Sure. And Musa, this is a fantastic question. I wish I had an hour to answer it, but I'm going to try to answer it briefly. I think there's several different things that you can do. So it depends on the AI. I talked about the value of the data that the AI is trained on. If you have a decision maker that's going to be making decisions, you want to make sure that you're using an AI that is trained on good data. So there's certain subsets of AI that are, for instance, trained on only peer-reviewed literature. There are a lot of the large AIs, especially at first, were trained on everything on the internet, includes social media, Reddit. Believe it or not, there's a lot of not true things on those websites. And if it's trained on not true data, then it might give a not true answer. So the data set's important. I think another way that you can deal with it is um, by integrating bias. So you can have, I do this very often. I'll be like, all right, give me a pros and cons for a specific position. Instead of just trusting the AI to give you an answer, you can say, all right, give me one side of the perspective and then give me the other side of the perspective. And I can make a decision about it based off the information that you provide. So I think you can integrate bias into it in a way that allows you to get to the truth a little bit easier. This I'll say two more things real quick. Trained, like whoever, I think we'll probably see a point where decision makers, if they're relying on AI, are going to have like an AI, I don't want to say interpreter or a specialist. One of the things I found when using AI, the more I use it, and given the context of the work that I use it in, the better it gets. So if you have an AI that's meant for a specific purpose, hopefully it's just not, you randomly open a specific AI and ask it a question. Hopefully there's a lot of context and memory associated with it around the topic that you're making a decision on. And then lastly, this is really important, especially as we're investigating AI and risk assessment, is knowledge graphs. So the structure of the data that it's trained on and what data it has access to when it goes to retrieve information is extremely important. And I think we're getting better and better structure of the data. People are investing a lot of time into how to structure data so that you get the most accurate answers. So I think that's another one. But like I said, I could keep going on, but I think those are a few things that'll help with the accuracy of information in the future.
Yeah, thank you so much, Justin. I think most of what you mentioned, yes, like instead of just putting it, giving AI and AI will agree with you, so to say, pros and cons, letting AI, I think that's what we do and that's what should be done. Yeah, so I'll take very quickly two more questions directed to Peter. Um, from Erin, it says, what ethical safeguards are most important when communicating technologies that may affect future generations? She's asking about ethical safeguards. And probably you just take the two questions together because the two last questions are directed. How has disinformation and misinformation affected interventions against the spread of Ebola currently happening in DRC and its environs? So the first question is on ethical safeguards, and the second is on disinformation and misinformation when it comes to Ebola in DR Congo and its environs. Peter.
Thank you so much. So I'll start with the last one. I know many of you have been following the news, but I think the most extreme example you might have seen is the actual physical destruction of the medical facilities by the people trying to reclaim the remains of their loved ones or things like that. So with any outbreak, you find that if there is the effort to do things like vaccination, you'll have hesitancy. If you have any effort to implement a kind of movement restriction, people may not believe you and may believe. So, for example, in Uganda in 2022 in Mubende, the government had to put a lockdown because we had an outbreak in Mubende and Kasanda. But because there used to be some gold mines there was a rumor going that no, the government wants to move us out of here and take our gold. So some people never took the disease seriously and never implemented the safety precautions and ended up getting sick. One of my most memorable events was there's a vet we were working with, and he was asked to put on his protective equipment while taking a sample from the ear of a cow. And he said, I've done this so many times, I'm fine. And the cow sneezed in his face. And he started panicking, and he had to take post-exposure prophylaxis to prevent getting anthrax. So some people also get desensitized and their risk perception is reduced to such a level. Like, for example, with Mpox, there was a lot of effort to work on sexual reproductive health, ensuring people use the right protection, not just for their genitals, but for their whole bodies. But some people who didn't believe that disease were real intentionally continued doing what they were doing before, and they got sick, and many of them would present to the hospital. And when you tell them they have Mpox, they said, but my friend told me the disease is not real. So I just want to say that when it comes to outbreaks in general, misinformation and disinformation, they really slow down. And then malinformation is even more vicious. I remember there was, I think it was measles in the US, and I think people were told to take vitamin A, and then they had all these overdoses, vitamin A, or people are told to take, honey for a particular disease, and all they take is honey, then it's too much honey. So malinformation, for me, giving people the right information in the wrong context or manipulating it to cause harm for me is even more malicious. And in outbreaks, some people are told intentionally not to take drugs or to take the wrong drugs, like taking an antibiotic when you have a viral disease. So back to the ethics of communicating to the future generations. So there are things, obviously, many of you know that, gene drives and the rest, yet they may not be old to you, but It is, coming up on a decade. But I think it's important that we do not make up pies in the sky. We need to communicate accurately, and we must maintain scientific integrity. You need to clearly distinguish between established evidence versus hypothesis or speculation. Someone starts from A, then they go to B, then they go to D. You need to speak transparently. Who developed this? Who funded this? Who benefits from this? You need to explain the assumptions, the limitations, the trade-offs. And I talked before about balanced communication. It's even more important here, but with the side from the point of view of benefits and risks. Don't just come and sell people all the good things that can happen without talking about the bad. Then I think it's important that sometimes, like I talked about plastics, because I was in Geneva about that time, and it was so disappointing that a meeting of 14 days failed to yield a sustainable outcome. We need to have intergenerational responsibility. We shouldn't only see things from our point of view and see things from how they benefit us. We need to recognize that the decisions made today may constrain or benefit future generations. We need to look at equity and inclusion as we think about future technologies. If you're talking about artificial reality or virtual reality, well, fine. But then what about people who are blind? How will this increase on the distance away from them if you transition away and you don't plan for braille and things like that? Respect for autonomy. I was telling a colleague recently that in Uganda near Bwindi forest, we still have the pygmies. So there are some people around the world who have chosen to live without technology and stuff like that. So we cannot force them and go beyond their autonomy. Some people, it's for religious reasons. But I mean, as I close, we need to also be speak with precaution under uncertainty. When evidence is lacking, please, please, please do not make stuff up. Even when many people will tell you that the main mode of operation for governments is MSU, make stuff up. If you don't know, just make it up along the way, and then we'll find a justification. I think that's not the right thing to do. And tell people when you don't know, tell people when you're over.
Yes, thank you so much, Peter. And thank you to all the panelists. Very informative session so far. We have really done justice to the questions. There's a comment from Mosa here who says, managing misinformation, disinformation, and related issues extends beyond the media, which I quite agree. It affects everyone on an individual level. Everyone is affected and can also be potential agents in the spread of misinformation. Consciously or unconsciously managing, consciously or unconsciously managing these issues should be integrated into the entire training program at all levels. Okay, this is a comment for the organizers, and from the primary and secondary schools through universities and other higher education. All right. So the French-speaking participants, I don't know if we have questions. If not, I think we have come to the end of this webinar so far. I would like to hand over to Rosalia to conclude. Rosalia.
All right, thank you very much to Gloria, and thank you so much to our participants for joining their first webinar on Truth Under the Microscope, Tackling Misinformation and Disinformation in Emerging Technologies and Life Sciences. So the next webinar will be on next Thursday, which is August 13th. A new link will be shared. Be sure to look at it and kindly register for it. It will be at the same time, that is 3 p.m. to 5 p.m. East Africa time. So when you register, then a link will be shared to you. Thank you also for sharing your thoughts in this webinar and for asking all the questions that you have asked. And I believe that Most of them have been answered, but we can still keep on engaging. We have some resources that have been posted on the chat. You can look out for those. We continue to engage on Science Against Misinformation hashtag and also AGBC webinars. Subscribe to our weekly newsletter. We have a weekly newsletter on genetic biocontrol technologies, where we look at trends and new information emerging. So subscribe to the weekly newsletter, and you can also give us your feedback on the same. Then on the chat still, we have some links. We have our post-webinar assessment. From this webinar series, we will issue certificates. But for you to earn a certificate, we need to be sure that you actually attended. And the way to do that would be to complete the post-webinar series. In that, to complete the post-webinar assessment, where you will also tell us what are other topics that you would like discussed in future, and we will be happy to look into those and to invite again our panelists, right? And then Peter mentioned a very important matter about intergenerational responsibility, and we are happy that that is actually one of the topics in the upcoming series. On 10th September, we have Rising Voices, Preparing Africa's Next Science Communicators. So be sure to diarize all the upcoming webinars every Thursday, 3 p.m. to 6 p.m. East Africa time. Then lastly, but not least, we have an upcoming Congress, the Africa Genetic Biocontrol Congress. It will be the 3rd Global Congress, and it will be happening in March 2027. And there's already in Nairobi, and there's already a call for abstracts. So please look for it on our social media handles and on the websites. Because abstracts are being considered right now, and get your work in, and get your abstract in order to get your work out at the Global Congress. We want to say thank you very much for your time. We want to upload we can upload them. We can upload our moderators, Dr. Gloria and Aruna. You can also give an emoji to say thank you to them. And a very big thank you to our panelists, Dr. Peter Babigumira, Dr. Erin Sorrell, who was also the co-organizer and partner in this webinar. We also want to say thank you to Dr. Justin Overcash, and also to Dr. Tara Kaxel, and also to Dr. Willie Sonui, who is the chair and founder of Africa Genetic Biocontrol Consortium. Thank you also to all the participants, and thank you to the team, the back team in here that made this possible. So from our end, we would like to welcome you again to webinar number 2 on August 13th, which is next Thursday. So be sure to look out for the links. Thank you. My name is Rosalia Omungo. Bye-bye.